The wolves hunted for the government, yet they respected them more than most men respect themselves. Frank Glazer was a man built for the wild, for cold, for isolation, for endurance. He out-tracked Eskimos, crossed frozen rivers alone, hunted bears, braved blizzards, and lived in a dirt-floored cabin for 13 long winters. Yet, for all his feats, most people have never heard his name. Glazer's life was forged in the wilderness, where toughness was the currency and survival was the only rule. Over 4 decades, he walked the razor-thin line between hunter and naturalist, killer and protector, legend and man. He knew the land like no one else, and when the wolves howled, he listened, not as a hunter, but as a man who understood the untamed spirit of the wilderness. In this episode, we'll unravel the story of Frank Glazer, a man whose life is a tale you can't fabricate, a life that is unrepeatable. Let's dive in. Chapter 1. The Great Escape to Alaska, 1915-1926. Frank Glazer wasn't looking for adventure. He was looking to leave everything behind. In May 1915, he boarded the SS Mariposa, carrying only 2 duffel bags, a .30-06 rifle, binoculars, and a hunger for freedom. Frank wasn't chasing gold or fame. He was escaping, and Alaska was where he went. Wildest greeted him with 25 feet of snow, an icy mountain pass, and a 371-mile trek to Fairbanks. The locals warned him. Too much snow in the pass. The rivers don't have bridges. 2 men were killed in Copper Center last year. But Frank wasn't intimidated. He paired up with an old sourdough, packed his supplies, and took off. The others? Soft city folk who wore street shoes and carried too much gear. Frank, on the other hand, kept moving. The snow grew waist-deep, and the trail became a brutal grind. His companions faltered, some quitting outright. Solomon cursed non-stop, his fancy boots a mess of blood and blisters. But Frank? He kept walking, knowing that stopping meant frostbite or worse. At night, the cold was relentless. The snow crusted over, but only to give way to waist-deep holes that would suck you in. By the time they reached Ptarmigan Drop Roadhouse, they looked half dead. The owner looked at them and said, "You won't make it unless it crusts over tonight." But Frank didn't wait. He didn't have time for waiting. And then there were the rivers. No bridges, just torrents of ice-cold water cutting across the trail. You stripped down, crossed, and hoped you didn't fall in. Frank once soaked his bleeding feet in freezing water, dried them off, put on fresh socks, and kept walking. "I learned fast," he said. "That toughened me up." The roadhouses along the trail were few and far between. Some were open, others boarded up tight. At Upper Tonsina, Frank got a bed, but also lice. His companion, disgusted, called him lousy for not checking the bed first. After that, Frank preferred the stars over any bed. When his sourdough partner peeled off to work a mine, Frank went solo, sleeping by day, hiking by night, always scanning the surroundings, alert for any sign of trouble. At Copper Center, Frank picked up Musher's knee from dragging heavy loads. The locals had a remedy. Stand in an icy stream till your legs went numb, then dry off, and keep going. Savage, but it worked. Along the way, Frank encountered a land of bizarre contradictions. There were farms where foxes were bred for their pelts, and stray dogs were ridden like ponies. He passed Signal Corps shacks where lynxes lounged on desks and tame doll sheep climbed haylofts. Civilization and wilderness mixed into one strange cocktail. One roadhouse, Sourdough, was run by a woman known as Swearing Molly. She was 6'2", sharp-tongued, and didn't take any crap from anyone. Despite her tough exterior, She ran a welcoming haven for traders, trappers, and drifters alike. Molly's place was immaculate. Carpeted floors, curtains, a warm fire, a magnet for those who had stories to tell or scars to show. Frank's journey wasn't just about surviving the terrain. It was about understanding the land. In his mind, Alaska wasn't a destination. It was home. And when he finally limped into Fairbanks, he was scarred, exhausted, and hollow-eyed. He'd walked nearly 400 miles through some of the harshest conditions on the continent, and he'd made it. "I came to Alaska looking for game," Frank once said. "What I found was something wilder." Chapter 2. Market Hunter of the North, 1915–1924. Frank Glazer didn't hunt for sport. He hunted for survival. In the harsh world of Alaska, meat was currency. Cash meant life, and Frank understood that more than anyone. He entered Fairbanks like a man on a mission, broken, tired, and scarred from his journey. But there was no time to rest. He knew that in the North, if you didn't hunt, you didn't eat. So he got to work, scouting the Alaska range, picking his spots, and getting busy. Between 1915 and 1924, Frank moved like a shadow through the backcountry near the Wildest Trail. His targets? Caribou, moose, Dall sheep, game that was vital to survive and vital to sell. Frank knew their patterns better than anyone. His approach was simple: shoot, butcher, haul, sell, repeat. Frank was a solitary figure, carrying his rifle and hauling meat over hundreds of miles. He never bragged. He never showed off. He didn't need to. He worked quietly, living by the rhythm of the wilderness. 100 pounds of meat on his back wasn't a feat to be celebrated. It was just the job. Once he took down a moose cow in the deep woods, dragging its meat out over miles of snow, sleeping under the spruce when the skies were clear, and by rock when the clouds rolled in. Frank didn't care for trophies. He cared about what fed him and what would feed others. He hunted pragmatically, only taking bulls or rams, leaving the breeders for the future. It wasn't about ethics. It was about logic. "Too cold to worry," Frank said once, referring to a particularly brutal winter storm. "Too cold to move." Food was scarce more often than not. Frank would shoot ptarmigan, boil bones, dig for roots, or eat whatever the land offered. Wasting nothing was his rule. If he killed it, it had a purpose. He hunted in the toughest, most unforgiving conditions: loose rock, ice-covered logs, steep slopes, fast-rising rivers. He was no stranger to loss. Once, a river swallowed half his moose pack. "Damn shame," Frank muttered. "That was good meat." The rhythm of winter was quiet, almost dead silent. Frank liked it that way. No voices for weeks, just the cold, the wind, and the work. "I never got lonesome," Frank once said. "I had my rifle, I had work to do." Out here, where survival was the only law, Frank became a master. His journal entries were concise, factual, and devoid of any flourish. Shot 2 moose, packed 1 down, too much snow for dogs, slept rough, snowed all night. Wind bad, nearly lost sled, killed 1 caribou, feet froze. Mistakes were costly, and there was no room for error. A twisted knee meant being stuck. Running out of food meant starving, but Frank never slowed down. He hunted, he packed, he survived. "I could pack 100 pounds easy," he once boasted. Did it all the time. Before Frank Glazer was the wolfman, before his legacy was sealed as a hunter for the government, he was a man of the land. And in Alaska, that was all you needed to be. Frank Glazer built his cabin on Savage River in 10 days. No crew, no blueprints. Just an axe, muscle, and a mind crafted for solitude. A sod roof, a dirt floor, and logs sealed with mud It wasn't pretty, but it was his, and it kept him warm. Nestled deep in the Alaska range, far from roads or people, the cabin was everything Frank needed. By 1924, he had left towns behind for good. Savage River offered space, game, and the peace only true isolation could bring. He lived there for 13 years. Winters could freeze your lungs, but he thrived. No neighbors, just wind and wolves. The wolves were his closest neighbors, howling through the valleys, moving silently through the snow. Frank didn't just hear them, he studied them. He tracked them for years, learning their ways. Sisuani, they're killers, he said, but smart. They deserve respect. His cabin was the base of operations for a man who was as much predator as protector. Trapping, hunting, and hiking across snowstorms without a compass, just pure instinct. I always knew where I was, he said. I could read the land like a book. His journal entries were sparse but telling. Snowed all night. Cut firewood. Wolf tracks near trapline. Life was hard, no doubt. When food ran low, Frank boiled spruce bark for sustenance. He skinned frozen kills by the light of his lantern and dried his boots by the stove. His rifle was always within reach, not for wolves, but for grizzlies who came calling in the spring. One journal entry reads, "Had a hell of a time crossing the river." He didn't elaborate, but years later he told the full story. Swept into an ice-choked current with his rifle under one arm, pack-soaked, boots dragging like anchors. Half frozen, he fought his way to the shore. But Frank didn't just live alongside wolves. He raised them, sort of. Each spring, he'd find wolf dens, snatch a few pups, and raise them with his sled dogs. The result was a pack of tough, wild hybrids he called wolf dogs, muscle-bound, unruly, and fiercely loyal. They'd fight like devils, Frank said, but when you hooked them up, they'd run like hell. He fed them caribou scraps and learned from them, watched how they moved, named them Canuck, Queenie. They weren't pets. They were partners, a piece of the wild, leashed but untamed. Inside his cabin, Frank turned into a field biologist of sorts. He studied tracks, scat, and behaviors. He even sketched his observations. By the 1930s, he was knee-deep in wolf studies, writing down everything from kill patterns to how wolves work together to take down prey. "People think they kill for fun," he wrote, "but they don't. They kill to survive, and they're better at it than most men." Frank admired their patience, their intelligence. He saw the dark side, too, how wolves would turn on their own if they made a mistake. "No second chances," he wrote. By the 1930s, his knowledge was so vast that even biologists turned to him. Adolph Murray used his notes for The Wolves of Mount McKinley. Local government agents treated Frank as a guide in the wild. "He knew wolves inside and out," said trapper Oscar Vogel. "Taught me tricks I never thought of." But the more Frank learned about wolves, the less he hated them. He still trapped them, still poisoned them, but he understood their place in the ecosystem. Eliminating wolves? Frank hated that idea, according to his friend Jim King. It's not about wiping them out. It's about balance. By the time he hit his 50s, people simply called him the Wolfman. A letter addressed to the Wolfman would still reach him in Fairbanks, where he lived sporadically. Frank didn't choose the nickname, but it fit. He could track wolves like nobody else, knew their paths, their habits, even where they slept. Frank wasn't soft, but he was fair. "Wolves are survivors," he said. "In Alaska, that's smart." Savage River wasn't just a place of survival, it was a crucible. Frank spent months without seeing a soul, with snow burying his cabin and temperatures dropping to 50 degrees. He never complained. I had what I needed, he said. Meat, water, quiet. What else is there? Sometimes, in the dead of winter, he swore he heard voices. Once, a grizzly raided his meat stash, leaving no tracks behind. Must have been a ghost, Frank said. Maybe he was joking, maybe not. Up there, logic didn't always apply. In the end, the cabin hardened him. It forged the man who understood wolves better than anyone. It shaped Frank Glazer. Chapter 4. Uncle Sam's Apex Predator, Government Wolf Hunter, 1937-1955. In 1937, Frank traded in his traps for a government badge. His mission? Kill wolves, no rules, no paperwork, just results. He worked alone, no schedule, no supervisor, just the vast, wild stretches of Alaska. One week he'd be in the White Mountains, snowshoes crunching underfoot, rifle in hand. The next, he'd be across frozen tundra, tracking paw prints through a vast silence. Frank was happiest 100 miles from anyone, knee-deep in snow, chasing wolves, one agent said. And chase them he did. He dug out wolf dens in spring, set snares in winter, laid poison in the fall. When aerial hunting was authorized, Frank took to the skies, a spotter flying low while Frank leaned out of the plane with a scoped rifle. One shot, he said. Miss? They're gone. Hit? You've got meat. Frank mastered the cyanide trap, baited with meat and hidden under leaves. One sniff, and the wolf was down. He kept meticulous notes. How many wolves, where they were, when they were killed, and even the weather conditions. In some areas, his records were the only official reports. His deadly skills weren't about technology. It was instinct. He could read a hair on the snow like a detective reading a crime scene. Frank knew the ridge they'd cross, the creek they'd drink from, where the alpha would leave his mark. Frank could look at grass and tell you what wolves were thinking, said one agent. Locals called him Amaruk Frank, Wolf Frank. He beat the wolves at their own game. When wolves raided reindeer herds, Frank responded, his traps worked. His poison was swift and effective. In 1948, Frank went to Nunivak Island to protect muskox. Local hunters had been killing them, but Frank didn't scold. He simply talked to them, and the killing stopped. They listened, said one pilot. He was straight with them. Frank never sugarcoated things. Wolves breed fast. Traps alone won't do it. You need poison, planes, den work, everything. Hit hard. Don't stop, he said. But even as a government wolf hunter, Frank never lost his respect for them. He studied them, watched them work together like soldiers on a raid. He still hunted them, but it wasn't personal. I don't mind shooting wolves, Frank wrote to the Game Commission. But when I find one in my trap, I feel ashamed. They're the true gentlemen of the predatory family. It was pure survival, a balance that Frank understood better than most. Too many wolves, and you've got no game, he said. His bosses trusted him completely. No room for soft feelings when you're paid to kill wolves, one supervisor said. As long as I'm director, you've got a job. And so Frank lived his life in the wild, trusted to track, to hunt, and to maintain the balance. Chapter 5. The legend lives on. Frank Glazer passed away in 1974, but in Alaska, his spirit endures. His name still rides the wind, carried on the howls of wolves. His stories echo in old-timer conversations, across trapline cabins, and over beers at local bars. Even though he's gone, the legend lives on. In the years before he died, stories about him had already begun to take on mythic proportions. One tale goes that in 1938, Frank rolled a government car 3 times down the Steese Highway. crawled out with cracked ribs, and jotted in his diary. Rolled over 3 times. Cut on head. Rib injuries. No drama, no pity. Anyone else would have died, one observer said, but not Frank. He was a man who never sought fame, who lived lean and loved the land. When he walked, he moved like a creature of the wild. His stories were like bursts of energy, raw and real. Frank never wanted accolades. He just did the job. Quietly, relentlessly. And when Alaska became a state in 1959, the wolf control policy shifted. Frank didn't fight it. He simply stepped aside. He left no children, no estate, only Alaska. Untamed, wild, and full of stories. Even today, when you walk the Alaska Range on a crisp winter morning and see the wolf tracks in the snow, you can still feel Frank's presence. Quiet, enduring, like the wind itself. Frank Glazer may be gone, but he'll never truly leave Alaska. He wasn't just the wolfman. He was a man who understood the wild more deeply than most of us understand ourselves.